Hey guys, All in Crypto here, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for the third YouTube video of the day. I wasn't actually intending on making another YouTube video. However, the sheer shocking nature of some of the news that we're getting from the Bank of International Settlements in regards to a huge sort of black hole of dollar debt that they're only just uncovering really has pricked my ears up. And you guys know that ultimately we think, given the macroeconomic conditions, that there's pain ahead for markets as they are, yet they're going to and set to get tighter. And I think that one real aspect that people are underpricing when they're coming up with their price models to where they should or shouldn't be investing is systemic risk, systemic failure on an economic global scale. The dollar being the world reserve currency, it's almost acted like that poison that is now being given to everyone. And essentially, you know, they've all drank from the same cup and they're all going to ultimately get sick as a result of it. That's a good way for me to describe the dollar as a reserve currency. You're going to have to forgive me, guys. Like I said, I didn't plan on... I've currently got trades on that I'm watching, so I'm going to be in and out. We're going to talk about the yield curve as well, because this is something when we talk about systemic failure that we've spoken about a crisis, a black swan-like situation that we're potentially moving towards. You know, we've scenario forecasted for Bitcoin, for example, how we think we get there. And essentially, I think we get to the bottom of markets is with some sort of a March 2020 style event. And we're setting up similarly to what we did in March 2020. For the stock market, it looks sort of like before we go into that deep dive in 2008. This sort of debt and there being a dollar squeeze as a result of it has actually been present in many financial crises, and certainly in 2019 when they were upping interest rates had a little bit to do with the currencies in the repo market, and then obviously the great financial crisis, we saw this again. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. We're going to explain it as best I can. This also explains why we're seeing such volume of daily FX turnovers subject to settlement risk remaining stubbornly high at $2.2 trillion. And could this also explain why you've seen worldwide central banks' quarterly gold purchase in tons go through the roof? Is it because they're worried also about a failure of, a systemic failure in terms of finance? But they're actually worried about the dollar, which, if you look at fiat systems, really they're just liability-based systems. They're debt-backed systems. I believe potentially what this yield curve, given the steepness, we've never seen a yield curve this steep, or we may have, but certainly not since 1989. Is this yield curve potentially predicting the rollover of the current monetary system, which just doesn't make sense to begin with? There's more debt out there than there is money to pay it. And it's now at an expansive or a more aggressively expansive rate of expansion as a result of what the Fed's done with their interest rate hike. So I really do not see any way, or I don't see everything that's going on right now ending very well at all. And you're going to ask yourselves, All in Crypto, what the hell are you doing talking about all this stuff? You guys will know that we've become engrossed with the macro situation and sort of really highlighting that there's something not quite right here for the best part of this year. And it just gets worse and worse. And even before, the start of this year, we were looking at the fact that the yield curve had inverted, or at the start of this year, I say the yield curve had inverted and what this potentially may mean. It's got a 100% hit rate of something serious taking place. And what we're seeing today come out from the Bank of International Settlements may be a factor in it. So let's go ahead and play the clip, their actual official video, and then I will read through it. This is going to be a long video, guys, because there's a lot to unpack. It's a very complex thing to explain, but I'm going to try and do my best as I understand it.
Some foreign exchange derivatives, such as FX swaps, forwards, and currency swaps, require that the full principal amount be exchanged at maturity. This distinguishes them from other types of derivatives in which the principal is not exchanged. Banks and non-bank financial firms are the biggest users of FX swaps. They use them to fund and hedge portfolios as well as to take positions. Most FX swaps have the US dollar on one side and have very short maturities. This makes FX swap markets vulnerable to dollar funding squeezes. We saw this during the Great Financial Crisis and again in March 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic went global.
So basically, he's sort of saying here that when you have a lot of these swaps maturing at one time, you end up with a fund squeeze where the funds aren't there and there's a real dollar squeeze. And this can lead to risk across the board, and potentially the debt not being paid, which may have cascading effects. And this is essentially, you know, the death of this system is going to be, in my opinion, on a failing of the debt that backs it. And we're seeing real issues. He's going to go on to talk about $80 trillion of unaccounted for debt through this swap market.
Because the payment obligations from FX swaps are not recorded on the balance sheet, they are generally not picked up in standard debt statistics. Yet the scale of the dollar payment obligations is staggering, at more than $80 trillion in mid-2022. The bulk of
more than $80 trillion in dollar-denominated debt obligations by mid-2022.
Of this dollar debt is likely owed by entities outside the United States for which the US dollar is a foreign currency. As of mid-2022, non-banks outside the United States owed as much as $26 trillion in such missing debt, up from $17 trillion in 2016. This is roughly double their dollar debt on their balance sheets. Similarly, non-US banks owed upwards of $35 trillion, compared to an estimated $15 trillion in dollar debt on their balance sheets. Since this debt is missing in standard debt statistics, it is difficult for analysts to anticipate the scale and geography of dollar rollover needs. Policymakers need statistics that better capture.
We'll leave it there. So basically it's saying that a lot of banks actually were a lot more indebted than they had initially said. And you know, often you'll use an FX swap maybe to hedge your portfolio, or for example to take a position in something. And if you end up in this situation, that position doesn't quite work out, you end up with this sort of bank run situation where you don't have the funds to cover the liability, and there's a lot of liability out there that is not being accounted for, ladies and gentlemen. This is one specific case, but there are, you know, there's going to be corporate versions of this. You're literally, in my opinion, the financial system as we know it is on very thin ice. You're waiting for somebody to chuck something up in the air and it's going to go straight through that ice and take everybody with it. And then do we see this merging into a new financial system, which I think we are looking at in our lifetimes, genuinely. And to really understand a debt-based system, it's a liability-based system that we live it, that we use in regards to fiat currencies. And I actually think that this potentially is what the yield curve again is predicting. We know something's coming, and I think it's going to be a large amount of defaults and a failure of you know, servicing debt that's going to have cascade that's just not manageable, like we've seen the other financial crises get diverted and that can get kicked down the road. Doesn't have to be this one, but it's inevitable at some point. But this is just absolutely alarming to me. FX swap forwards and currency swaps create forward dollar payment obligations that do not appear on balance sheets and are missing in standard debt statistics. Non-bank outside the US, United States owes as much as $25 trillion in such missing debt, up from $17 trillion in 2016. Non-US banks owe upward of $35 trillion. Much of this debt is very short-term, and resulting rollover needs make for dollar funding squeeze. Policy responses to such squeezes include central bank swap lines that are set in a fog. So there's no sort of deadline, or there is, but it's when it can be paid, with little information about a geographic distribution of missing debt. So this is one of the most alarming things. They don't actually know. You know, it's not an accountable system. And it gets to that point where it's kind of like banks giving out or taking in. It's kind of like people going to those banks all at once and going, can we have our money? And the bank goes, well, it's not there. We don't have the funds to pay you basically the debt that we owe. So embedded in the foreign exchange market is huge. Unseen dollar borrowing in an FX swap. For instance, Dutch pension funds or Japanese issuer borrow dollar and lend euro or yen in the spot leg. The later repays the dollar and receives euro or yen in the forward leg. Thus, an FX swap along with its close cousin, a currency swap, resembles a repurchase agreement or repo. Remember, it was a repo market that somewhat went wrong in 2019 with a currency rather than a security as a collateral. So remember, these, just like a security, it can move up and down as well. So the sheer amount here is absolutely staggering. The key takeaways are FX swaps, forward and currency swaps give rise to dollar obligations that were backstopped in 2008 and 2020 by central banks acting on little information about who owed the debt. So this is the thing, they don't even know who owes it. For non-banks outside the United States, dollar obligations for FX swaps, foreign and currency swaps have grown fast, reaching $26 trillion or double their on-balance sheet dollar debt. So they owe a lot more than they actually are saying they do. In mid-2022, non-banks with US direct access to Federal Reserve credit only in their US operations owed an estimated $39 trillion in dollar from FX swap forwards and currency swaps. Not looking good, guys, at all. So there's a lot of debt out there that needs to be paid. The real question is, will it get paid? And this is the thing you've got to ask yourself. You know, why are we seeing central banks actually go and load up on gold during this time period, this very uncertain time period? They're doing that as a form of hedging themselves against some sort of currency failure, or, you know, what's the sort of reasoning for that? I would suggest that may indeed be it. But it's certainly an interesting time to be alive, guys. I think in our lifetime, we are going to see a new monetary system. I think it's actually probably going to just merge with the old one. It will be, you know, it's kind of the parasites that be will just find another body, basically. But this is what I think we're looking at is debt failure. And you've got to think to yourself, what do you guys go to work every morning for? And, you know, spend the majority of your lives working for money, and money is really an obligation to pay a liability down the road. And these guys can't even keep track of who owes what. Well, what value does that actually give to money as a principle, and why and how is it that people have been somewhat tricked into spending the majority of their lives working for it and giving up? You know, I believe that people should work, but for a fair value, you know, not something that can be totally controlled and manipulated and dictated to us by a very small number of people who can't even keep track of it and have no real interest in maintaining its value and upholding its kind of store of value. That's all I've got for you in this video, guys. It's quite an in-depth one, but certainly an interesting one. I found it very, very interesting. From a trading point of view, I've got to ask myself, okay, what's this going to do for dollar demand? And a number of other things, and how is this going to affect our plays moving forwards? But that's for another video. I'm going to love and leave you on that note. If you enjoyed the content, like, as always, appreciate it. So as a comment, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in the next YouTube video. Thanks a lot for watching, guys.